Watching Jeopardy recently, announcer Johnny Gilbert mentioned that one of the contestants is a tropical fruit expert. I couldn't concentrate on how many clues I was going to miss during the game because I kept thinking I didn't know people were tropical fruit experts. So I contacted the Jeopardy contestant / tropical fruit expert. His name is Myles Karp, and he's based in Costa Rica, which is pretty tropical. And I asked if he would appear on our job description podcast. He graciously agreed, and we called him up, which may be the first time I've ever talked to anyone in Costa Rica.
Hello.
Or so I thought.
I'm actually in Florida at the moment. I was in Costa Rica yesterday.
Oh, I'm disappointed for some reason.
Yeah, sorry to disappoint.
So you have degrees in anthropology and cognitive science from the University of Pennsylvania and Oxford, which to me, someone who flunked out of a place called Baylor, I find particularly impressive. But now I glanced over their course catalogs and I saw no classes in exotic pears or the history of starfruit. What road academically led you to exotic fruit, and what are some of the exotic fruits that we here in New England might not find at our admittedly not great supermarket chains?
I suppose that my journey from anthropology and cognitive science to fruit was not necessarily via the academic path. That was more of a diversion. I never intended to become an anthropologist or a cognitive scientist. I just always... I do identify, I appreciate the American perspective on higher education, which, I've spent a lot of time outside the U.S., and I know that in the U.S. in particular, higher education isn't necessarily a direct path to a job. It's more like go to a good school and then study something you find interesting and then figure it out. You can't really go and get a job at an anthropology firm.
Right.
Although I sort of did. But basically the way that I got to fruit was that when I was studying anthropology and cognitive science at Oxford in the UK, I was feeling cold. I was feeling somewhat homesick. I was used to warmer subtropical weather because I grew up in Florida, and I saw a sign advertising funding opportunity for a student to go somewhere in the world and do something adventurous and worthwhile. And this was endowed in the name of a student who had died, who was also a mountaineer.
Okay.
So I was dreaming about going somewhere warm. I had a good friend living in Costa Rica, and I just started thinking about what is going on in Costa Rica that would constitute a good grant application. And I remember hearing that the banana we've been eating our whole life is a poor substitute for a previous banana that had been wiped out by disease.
Okay.
So the banana that formed our conception of the banana societally, our grandparents' banana, was better. And then a fungus spread around all the banana production regions of the world, made banana production unviable for a bit. There's an iconic song, Yes, We Have No Bananas, that's sort of somewhat about that crisis. And so at the time, the banana industry was desperately seeking a substitute that not only was resistant to this disease, but also was hardy enough to withstand global shipping, which is not a small ask. And the only one that they knew about was this one called the Cavendish. They really resisted switching their production over to the Cavendish because the Cavendish is bland. Although it is hardy and it is disease resistant, eventually they had no choice. They switched production over to this bland, disease resistant substitute. And that's the only banana we know. That's our banana. And so I learned that they still grow. The old one isn't extinct. It's just commercially extinct. And so I thought it would be really cool to try it. I had been thinking about trying it, and I found out that Costa Rica is one of the places where they still grow it on a small scale, not for export, but just for like domestic local consumption. And so I designed this project whereby I would go to Costa Rica, find a disease-free specimen of this old banana, and then send it back to the Oxford Botanical Garden, where we could also use it as sort of a talking point about just agricultural themes, like, for example, monoculture. A monoculture is when you grow only one crop in large production areas, and it's efficient economically, but it creates vulnerabilities also economically and in terms of food supply, because if you grow only one thing and then a disease comes that can wipe out that one thing, you're screwed. And that's exactly what happened. So I applied, I got this funding. I went to Costa Rica for about 2 months. By day, I was working on banana farms. I was hanging out with scientists, adventuring around the jungle, looking at plant parts under microscopes. And then nights and weekends, I was hanging out with my friend who lived there, and we were going to these beautiful waterfalls and beaches, and I was just making friends and established somewhat of a relationship with the country. So I mean, I did eventually find the banana. I found a few extra specimens as well in case the DHL package didn't make it successfully back to Oxford. It did. I gave the extra one to the New York Botanical Garden, and then also put one in my parents' backyard in Florida. That one's still alive. The one in Oxford's still alive. The one in New York died. And so
there's some symbolism there, I think.
Yeah, there is. There's definitely, it says a lot about my mother's care. Hi, Mom. And I didn't expect this to turn into a career. Like, this was sort of like a fun little trip, a diversion. I moved to New York. I started working as a consultant, but I had established a little bit of expertise on bananas. And I wrote to the New York Times. Amazingly, they got back to me. I wrote to them saying, there's a story I want to tell about bananas. Well, the story that I thought needed telling was that the new banana, the cultivar that has been established as the disease-resistant substitute, that one is now being wiped out by a new, more virulent strain of that same fungus that wiped out the predecessor. It's a really dire situation because it's basically impossible to breed new bananas.
Wow.
They reproduce asexually. They're all clones of each other. They don't have seeds. So it's really hard to hybridize and breed new ones. And so there basically is no substitute waiting in the wings. And if this fungus spreads around too much and starts wiping out the new one, the whole banana industry and also economies and communities that rely on banana exportation and banana cultivation for food and for their livelihoods, they're really vulnerable. So I wrote to the New York Times. It was like info@newyorktimes.com or something like that. I didn't expect to hear back saying I just got back from this trip. I'm a graduate student. I have this story to tell. And they said, yeah, go ahead and write it. I did. That one never got published ultimately, but I realized that I was capable of writing, and specifically writing about fruit, because I had this little experience that sort of positioned me as a bit of an expert. And then I just got pigeonholed. Like, basically, I've always loved writing. I've always expected that I would write. Unfortunately, the journalism world changed a lot. Like, right when I was becoming employable, that was when everyone was switching to clickbait. And I mean, you work for a newspaper, you know that the journalism industry isn't the same as it used to be. So I decided to do it sort of like on the side. But I just kind of accidentally fell into writing about fruit because it was like the first thing that I established expertise in just by chance. And then once I started writing about fruit, I had credibility writing about fruit. And then people would reach out to me with fruit information. They'd say, you have to hear about pears. And I would say, okay, sure. And if I wanted to, get access to some fruit expert or fruit institution, I'd have a resume that would convince them to talk to me. And then I just started writing more and more about fruit, and basically every time I wanted to take a vacation to the tropics, all I had to do was find a fruit related thing there and do something journalistic with it afterward, and then my trip would be paid for.
Right.
So I did that while I was living a double life as a consultant, and eventually when I got tired of living in New York and tired of having like a regular office job, I decided to just move to the jungle in Costa Rica and see if I could do that full time. And that's when I really committed to learning a lot about fruit and writing more about fruit and searching for fruit. And I've collected rare fruits for botanical gardens. I've given lectures about fruits. I've tasted all sorts of funky fruits. People like to send me their fruits. So yeah, it was sort of an accident. Like I didn't grow up thinking that I wanted to eventually be a fruit expert. It just ended up being the thing that I had expertise in, and then that made it easier to get more expertise in that thing, and lo and behold, I'm the fruit guy.
You are indeed, and I must say that Peter and I both are former triathletes who have eaten probably thousands of bananas in our lives, and now we realize that they were substandard bananas.
Yeah.
That's so if I had one of the magic bananas, I would go, wow, this is bursting with a flavor I never anticipated. Is that fair?
I think it's fair to say that you would react that way if you were primed to do so. Like they're not, I mean, I don't think that if I snuck a glass of the world's best wine into like a pizza meal where you weren't really paying attention,
right.
If you took a sip, would you say, oh my God, is this Opus 1?
Right.
You kind of have to be paying attention to notice the differences. But if you are paying attention, you'd say, yeah, this is definitely creamier in texture. The aroma is definitely stronger. The taste is more concentrated. And I mean, the first time that I actually was able to eat one of these, I think that everyone who was with me was quite used to it. It was just a banana for them. They didn't realize that I had been researching and searching for this banana for a really long time. For them, it was just like, hey, you want a snack? And they were just munching on their bananas. And I was like photographing it and measuring it and taking notes and sniffing it and licking it and just trying to internalize everything I was experiencing while eating that banana. And yeah, there's definitely a difference. And it's not possible to get that banana in the States. Like it's not like you go to a specialty store and get it. But you can get different and better fruits if you travel. Like people often ask me advice for buying fruit and picking fruit. And I would say that in summary, eat fruit when you travel that is local to the places where you're traveling. And then you're going to get the better varieties, even the ones you don't hear about because they're not exported, because they're not exportable, because they don't stay unripe for a consistent amount of time. They get bruised too easily. American supermarkets demand visual perfection and consistency that most fruits can't provide. So if you travel and eat things locally, you'll have access to a lot fresher, a lot more diversity of fruit.
So what you've just said, in part at least, makes me... I was thinking about asking you, it would seem to make sense, why couldn't you, and possibly it would make profitable sense if you started exporting cool and weird fruit back here, but I think you just answered why that wouldn't work.
I mean, I've thought about it. I unfortunately, short-sightedly became an expert in something that is just not very profitable. Like if I had accidentally fallen into being an expert on like banking,
yeah, or
gold or diamonds, then maybe I would have more temptation to like actually go into business with this expertise. But fruit is just, I mean, in order to make any money on fruit, it's got to be a volume game. And like, I don't want to be dealing with like the sorts of, that's just like a logistics thing. But I've thought about exporting small quantities of like super high quality specialty fruits. It's just dealing with the bureaucracy. And two bureaucracies, like you have to deal with the bureaucracy from the country where you're exporting, and then the American bureaucracy, and often the bureaucracies in the places where fruit grows well, like in nations in the tropics that might not be as technologically or governmentally advanced. Those bureaucracies are such a headache.
Right.
So I think it's a cool idea. And I mean, there was one time I encountered a mango that grows only in one small town in Costa Rica. And one time I ate this mango and cried. And that's not an exaggeration. I once ate a mango and cried because it was so good.
So if I send you, I have to interrupt. If I send you my address, would you mail me one of those mangoes?
No,
it wouldn't work.
It's not possible.
Okay.
You have to get permission to import every fruit.
All
and
right.
I mean, I'm not going to admit that I have smuggled fruit. But the only way really to get most of this stuff is to like pretend that you forgot a few in the backpack. And if you get caught, be like, oh, that was just a snack for the plane. These mangoes that I found, I didn't discover them. Someone else bred them. Although it was an accident. I went back to the place where I had gotten this mango. I asked around. I visited the farm. I asked them, what's the deal with these mangoes? They said, we had this land that was abandoned for a really long time. Mangoes hybridize really easily. So if you leave mangoes or like old mango trees alone for years, when you come back, you're going to have new varieties that have never been tried before. They tried all of them, decided one of them was the best tasting. Then they planted a bunch of those, and they named the variety after their family. It's the Cavallini mango that grows on the Cavallini family's Cavallini farm. They had never exported them. They'd never even thought about it. It's a small operation. And I was just thinking, if I could be the first person to bring these mangoes to the US and sell them at some, like Dean and DeLuca, a little expensive specialty store, like Dean and DeLuca specifically was what I had in mind in New York.
Not 7-Eleven.
Not 7-Eleven.
Yeah.
It'd be like, $10 a mango or something like that. That would be a fun project. I probably wouldn't make much money. And then I started talking to some people who deal with the logistics of exporting fruit, and it just sounded like such a headache that it wasn't worth it. And then Dean and DeLuca went out of business, and I kind of just moved on with my life.
If you had gotten them those mangoes earlier, you might have saved the corporation, Myles.
Maybe. Maybe.
Well, let me ask you this. On your website, in your bio, one of your hobbies is making smoothies. And I thought, well, isn't that convenient?
Yeah.
I should think that drinking a smoothie concocted by Myles Karp is going to be in a top 5 all-time smoothie. So please don't tell me that you just put a little kale and an apple in there.
No, I'm going to admit I'm really good at making smoothies.
Yeah, right.
Part of that is access to the right fruits.
Yeah, well, sure. But is there a favorite smoothie you would make for a particular occasion?
Yeah,
Seducing a paramour, or
yeah, that's
so.
one
I guess
recipe.
You can't tell me the recipe, or that would ruin it.
I could tell you the recipe. I mean, I could tell you general smoothie principles that I hold dear. For example, I think it's important to balance sweetness with acidity or bitterness. So, like, for example, my morning smoothies, although they are fruit-based, they also have coffee grinds and raw cacao. Because I think untamed sweetness is, it's just an unsophisticated experience. I mean, I think wine connoisseurs would say the same thing about wine. Like if you have a sweet wine, you want it to be balanced with some crisp acidity. I think the same thing is true of smoothies, or basically anything you would eat or drink. So I'm thinking about, it would never be just a bunch of bananas. That would be too sweet. I would add something tart or something a little bit bitter. But mostly, I think that a smoothie, as long as you have access to really special fruit, should be a showcase for that fruit. And if you have like a particularly good mango at the time, I wouldn't crowd it with all sorts of other stuff. I would have one fruit be the star of the show. I always like to include a banana because a banana is important for the texture of the smoothie. If you don't put a banana in your smoothie, it's not going to be creamy. It's going to end up being chunky. A banana just does something for the distribution of pieces. And I think it's a very important sort of base ingredient, like in the way that the French think of the mother sauces is like the base of any dish. I think a banana needs to be the base of any smoothie. Then one fruit that's the star of the show. And then if it's too sweet, add something a little bit bitter or a little bit tart. Those are my smoothie principles.
That makes perfect sense. And it's something that I will hold dear because I'd put like beef jerky in a smoothie and just try that. So Peter's grimacing. I'm just kidding, but
I'm into savory smoothies too. I think we have a lot of psychological hangups related to food.
Oh, definitely.
Like salty and savory beverages are like considered weird, but if you eat it with a spoon, it's a soup. So
yeah,
I think we should get over that.
All right, now listen. I'm not telling you this because but I'm telling our listeners. There's a fruit, and I believe I'm pronouncing this correctly, called rambutan, which I believe you described as delicious despite the fact that they look like, and I quote you here, Dr. Seuss's testicles.
Yeah.
So, is that and I looked at a picture of them, and I never saw Dr. Seuss without his underwear, but I think you're probably right on. It's a good tasting fruit. You have to get beyond the appearance of it.
Yeah, or maybe it's not despite the appearance. It's also because the appearance is very exotic.
It is exotic.
And that's just the outside that looks like Dr. Seuss's testicles. Or, I mean, I guess it's more accurate to say like the testicles of a Dr. Seuss character, but
yeah.
But we never know the source of his inspiration, so maybe. But then once you crack that open, there's like an eyeball sort of thing on the inside. It's like a milky white, semi-translucent ball, if you will.
Yeah.
That tastes. It's not a nondescript sweet because there's like a bit of a floral rose note, I think. And then there is a big seed, which I think most people probably spit out, but I actually eat the seed. I have heard they're toxic. I'm not too concerned, but it adds a bit of textural complexity and nuttiness. It's basically a nut. It's an edible seed. So, it's a whole experience. You have to peel off the weird fuzzy thing on the outside, chew on the eyeball meat on the inside, and then either eat the nut, spit out the nut, and they're small enough that you munch on a bunch of them. It's like a snack.
All right.
That's a good one. And that one is called, it has different names all around the tropical world. So rambutan, I think, is the Thai name. It's at least what they call it in Southeast Asia, but they call it a mamonchino in most of Latin America.
Okay. So you just effortlessly used a very concise but evocative few adjectives there when you were describing that. So I was wondering if I could throw a few other names at you, and you can confirm whether they are in fact fruits and whether I would enjoy eating them if I could get my hands on it. And so I guess I was like to know if they're fruits and throw a few descriptive qualities about them. Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
And I apologize in advance if in fact I screw the pronunciation up. But how about Biriba?
Biriba.
Yes.
Oh yeah, that one looks kind of like a mace, like the medieval
Torture weapon.
weapon,
Yeah.
like a ball with spikes. It's yellow. It's about that size, like
Wow, that's
maybe
big.
like yeah, it's like you would need your whole hand in order to hold it. It it's not that flavorful. I think I remember the description I gave for that one was just to taste like milk.
Milk.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I'm going to go to the trouble of eating a mace-like fruit, I want more than milk, I think.
But some, some are good for the texture in addition to the taste. Like if you're thirsty, there's nothing more refreshing than water, even though it doesn't taste like anything. So some of these fruits are like eating water.
Yeah,
And
that's good.
especially if you chill them, the fact that the taste is subtle isn't necessarily an issue. Like it's like a cold, fleshy thing, which is full of water too,
Yeah.
that you can eat a lot of because the taste isn't overwhelming. I don't really know what people do with biribah. Like every time I encounter a fruit that I've never seen before, and I have some vendors where I'm just like, what do you have this week? And they say, oh, check this thing out. And I say, I've never seen that, so I'll just buy it and see what happens. And the biribah didn't make much of an impression on me, so I don't think I ever bought it again.
Okay.
But it's also, I mean, it's related to other ones that people would be more familiar with. Like I think it's closely related to the custard apples, which would be like guanabana, aka soursop.
And by the way, I had Grenadilla on the list.
Granadilla. Oh, that's my favorite.
Oh, it is. Oh, I thought that's what you
Yeah.
just. Okay, what is that?
Guanabana. Guanabana is what I said.
Oh, I'm
That's
sorry. I misunderstood.
it's okay. There's a lot of unfamiliar words here.
So, what about Grenadilla?
Grenadilla is a type of passion fruit. Passion fruits are all basically gloop pods. It's like a sphere that you would open up, and there's a gloop inside. Not for lack of a better word, I think that is the best word, gloop.
It's a good one.
And most passion fruits that people would be familiar with are just way too tart to eat on their own. And they have a really strong flavor that is good if you incorporate a little bit into something else. So like a little bit of that passion fruit gloop in a smoothie can add some tartness and also, just a bit of the distinct flavor of passion fruit. But the grenadilla is one that is sweet enough that you can just eat it on its own. And it's a particularly large, fruitful gloop pod with a lot of gloop inside. And I mean, the appearance is super exotic. It's like some sort of an alien egg. And you open it up and it's like smaller alien eggs, the gloop. And they call it, some people, at least in Costa Rica, where I spend a lot of time, they call it moco de elefante, which is elephant boogers, elephant mucus.
Well, there's a way of describing these fruits that aren't necessarily appealing.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we have to divorce ourselves from the implications of the descriptions. Like, I don't think it tastes like elephant mucus, but even if it has the texture of elephant mucus, that doesn't mean that it's
No.
going to be bad. And I think it's the perfect beach fruit because you can eat it without any utensils. You don't have to touch the stuff you're eating. You just crack it open and slurp it.
Yeah.
It's refreshing, hydrating. You can throw the outside straight into the beaches that I go to have jungle next to them. Throw that into the jungle. And it's like you could just be super lazy eating it. It requires such little effort. Crack it open, slurp the gloop, throw it away. And if you chill it and keep it in a cooler, which I like to do, that's another thing. It's like eating, it's like edible juice, something in between food and drink. But the taste is also just amazing. It's kind of indescribable. It's got some of the tartness that someone who's familiar with a passion fruit would recognize, but also a lot more sweetness. And I think tart plus sweet in the right proportion is like a complete gustatory experience. So I think it's kind of the perfect fruit.
All right.
It's also really good on yogurt.
Okay. That works for me. And you've complete with your beach encroached by the jungle scenario makes us all here in the cold Northeast wish that these things were accessible to us. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't quickly ask you about that. The reason I know about you, as you alluded to earlier, is that when you were introduced on Jeopardy, Ken Jennings or whoever that gives you gives the introduction of who the person is mentioned that you were a tropical fruit expert, and I thought I don't really remember much about the episode because my wife and I were going, there's a guy who's a tropical fruit expert, and that was just mind-boggling to me. And but here's what I want to know. First of all, I hope you enjoyed that experience. But here comes a contestant on Jeopardy, and he gets taken backstage to the green room, where traditionally you would have like a basket of fruit for the guests. Did that in fact happen? And did you go, what a suck collection of fruit, given your background?
If I were invited onto the show prior to the pandemic, that might have happened. But
okay.
They took the COVID restrictions really seriously. And so there were no snacks provided. We had to wear masks at all times while we were back there. We had some designated snack times in which we were allowed to go outside and stand on particular marked spots 6 feet apart and eat the snacks that we brought. But no, there were no fruit baskets. No breathing allowed. It was, I mean, that actually made the experience, I think, a little bit more anxiety inducing because we couldn't even stress eat. And I brought coffee and wasn't allowed to drink it for a few hours because I had to wait for the green light to take my mask off outside and drink the coffee. And also we were like trying to get to know each other, all the contestants backstage, and lighten the mood up. We were also wearing masks the whole time, so it was a little bit more difficult.
Huh. Well, first of all, you didn't win, but you did very well that day.
Thank you. Yeah, it was close.
So if you had to bring your own snacks to one of the most popular shows in the world, were you able to submit like an expense thing saying, since you can't provide me snacks, as I would expect, they would reimburse you for bringing your own snacks?
No.
Oh.
They didn't cover the costs of travel or hotels either. But the idea is, even if you lose, you get some money. If you come in first, you get the amount of money that you accumulated during gameplay plus the chance to come back the next day. If you come in second, you get $2,000. If you come in third, you get $1,000. So the idea is that the expenses for the trip are covered no matter how you do. Now, ultimately, I don't know if that has kept up with inflation. Maybe they might eventually increase those amounts a bit, but no, I was not gonna. I'm not holding my breath, but they did recently institute something called the Second Chance Tournament.
Ooh, cool.
And I don't want to get on their bad side because maybe they'll invite me to the Second Chance Tournament.
Well, listen, you travel safe. Don't bring any spiders back. We don't want that. Don't bring any spiders.
Yeah, I'm careful with the phytosanitary stuff. I'd be a hypocrite if I weren't.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough. Myles, thank you, sir. It's been wonderful, and I appreciate you guys you taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you very much.
Job Description is a production of the Day Publishing Company in New London, Connecticut, and is hosted by me, Rick Koster. Peter Wappy produces and edits the show. Our theme song is Here and Now by the band Wind Up, written by Michael Clay and Ernie Myers. Can't get enough of me? I write a free weekly newsletter called The Fun Never Stops. You can subscribe at theday.com/newsletters. If you want to support this podcast, leave a rating or a review wherever you listen to, or even better, subscribe to The Day at theday.com/subscribe.